and we're going to examine it fairly thoroughly. We'd like to try and find out exactly what's making those tracks, which undoubtedly have been found in the Himalayas.
What are you going to do if you find a snowman?
Two of the greatest climbers, you and Sir Edmund Hillary, were Yeti chasers.
Yes.
They didn't look like the footprints of a man, a bear or a yak, the only animals that could even conceivably be on a glacier at this altitude. But the Sherpas knew exactly what they were. Yeti footprints.
Ты видишь его? Сюда смотри, слышь? Нихуя уебал. Пошли нахуй отсюда. Пошли быстрее нахуй. Да пошли ты. Кирилл. Да ну нафиг, пошли. Кирилл, жди!
Cold is the night and rugged is the land. We find ourselves in one of the world's most isolated and breathtaking regions of this planet, the Himalayas, a vast ever-stretching mountain range that weaves through 7 different Asian nations and is home to 10 out of the 14 world's tallest and most famous peaks, including Mount Everest. Interestingly enough, not only are the Himalayas home to awe-inspiring terrain and magic, they would somehow be home to a mythical creature as well, a creature whose stories and legends have preceded him for centuries through tales of the locals of the region. The Yeti, or as us Westerners have come to know, the Abominable Snowman. Follow along as we discover the much more real and compelling history that this creature has to offer. The most common comparison to Western cryptids would be that of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, with the Himalayan Yeti said to resemble a large bipedal ape-like creature that is covered with brown, gray, or white hair, and is sometimes depicted as having large teeth or large claws. Most history and knowledge of the creature coming from Sherpa folklore and Tibetan Buddhism, with tales being passed down through generations of family. Up until the late 1800s, Westerners wouldn't have heard or learned of the existence of such creature. The myth and tale of such a creature had existed for centuries within the region. The belief in the Yeti as a real, physical creature became established enough that when accounts of Alexander the Great and his Macedonian army stormed through the Indian subcontinent in 326 BC, he, personally, reportedly demanded to see one, only for the locals to refuse by claiming that it would not survive at low altitudes. Alexander had heard stories of this mysterious ape-like creature that had lived in the Himalayas, so he went off on a mission to hunt the Yeti. He thought this would be a major discovery in zoology and evidence of his victories. One of the rare setbacks in his otherwise remarkable, undefeated career came when he was unable to capture the elusive Yeti, even after personally dispatching his soldiers to search the highlands of northern India for said creature. Each search party would return back unsuccessful. Another interesting anecdote comes from Alexander's close friend, Nearchus, offering an interesting tale that sheds light on Alexander's journey and possible interactions with the said Yeti. In his book, Indique, Nearchus describes how when fleeing India, Alexander's troops engaged in combat with what potentially appeared to be Yetis. There are interesting similarities between the locals described that they had met and battled against, and the story and description of Yetis. The locals were described as being extremely hairy and covered in animal skins, using long nail-like implements as weapons. An interesting anecdote and story that many say could possibly be a description of Yeti. Although abundant throughout Sherpa folklore and Buddhism, not much was known about these creatures outside of the Himalayas. In what was believed to be the first known sighting and documented account of a Yeti came in 1832 from an anecdote from trekker B.H Hodgson's excerpt and account of his experiences in northern Nepal. He described his local guides and the rest of his party spotting a tall, bipedal creature covered with long dark hair and no tail, which he referred to as a wild man, that was said to have, and I quote, moved erratically across the ice, which seemed to flee in fear when spotting the party. Hodgson described that his men, instead of going after or engaging with the creature, thought it best to leave it be. Hodgson concluded that it must have been an orangutan or another form of primate based upon its features that had wandered up to high altitude. Another early account of the creature came in 1899 from Lieutenant Colonel Laurence Waddell, who was a Scottish explorer and professor, an extraordinary man in his own rights. He is said to be one of the real-life inspirations of the character Indiana Jones. In 1899, Major Laurence Waddell released his book, Among the Himalayas, which told the story of his countless trips throughout the high mountain ranges of the region in the 10 years previously. In this text, he noted a slightly interesting event that occurred during a trip in the eastern range of the Himalayas near Darjeeling, India, which took place roughly 10 years earlier, around the year of 1889. While crossing a path towards some glaciers, Waddell and his crew discovered large, unusual set of footprints in the snow that had crossed their track and headed up towards the higher peaks. The natives in his crew told him that these tracks belonged to hairy wild men who they had believed lived in the high snowy mountains. Waddell, a man of reason, had a different opinion. He felt that the creature was purely mythical. He stated in his book his beliefs that the track belonged to the great yellow snow bear, which is a highly carnivorous, large creature that does inhabit the area. He felt that the superstitions of the native was such that they couldn't look at the bear's track without telling themselves that they had belonged to wild men, as it was part of their folklore and history. Although only a brief and skeptical excerpt, the mention and description of a real physical footprint or track would be one of, if not the first documented account of the Yeti, and slowly brought more validity to the potential existence of such a creature. Another famous incident occurred during the 1921 British Mount Everest expedition, when Charles Howard Berry and his colleagues set off on their reconnaissance mission to survey the mountain and the surrounding regions. They spoke of a very unusual event in which his party, at an altitude of over 6,000 meters in the vicinity of Lac Bala, came across a set of large human-like footprints in the snow. Expedition leader Berry, perplexed by the tracks, but resorting to reason, had concluded that they must have been made by the loping or galloping-like movement of a wolf. Local guides and porters, however, gasped at the sight. They said they belonged to the legendary mythical, roughly translating as the man-bear snowman. Charles Berry writes the following, and I quote, "We wended our way without much difficulty through the icefall of the glacier below, some superly fluted snow ridges that rose straight above us, then followed a long and at times somewhat steep climb over soft and powdery snow to the top of the pass. Even at these heights, we came across tracks in the snow. We were able to pick out the tracks of hares and foxes, but one at first that looked like a human foot puzzled us considerably. Our coolies at once jumped to the conclusion that this must be the wild man of the snow, to which they gave the name mythical, the Abominable Snowman. These tracks, which caused so much comment, were probably caused by a large, loping gray wolf, which in the soft snow formed double tracks, rather like those of a barefoot man. To bet however, is not the only country where there exists a boogeyman. In Tibet, he takes the form of a hairy man who lives in the snows, and little Tibetan children who are naughty and disobedient and frightened by wonderful tales that are told about him. To escape from him, they must run down the hill, and his long hair falls over his eyes, and he is unable to see them. Many other such tales have they, which to strike terror into the hearts of bad boys and girls." End quote. Again, as the early 1900s continued on, and more adventurers continued to arrive in the region, stories and sighting of this mysterious creature would increase alongside them. In 1925, N.A Tombazi, a photographer and member of the Royal Geographical Society, writes that he personally saw a creature at about 15,000 feet near the Zimu Glacier. Tombazi later wrote that he observed the creature from about 200 or 300 yards away for about a minute. He writes, and I quote, "Unquestionably, the figure in outline was exactly like a human being, walking upright and stopping occasionally to pull at some dwarf rhododendron bushes. It showed up dark against the snow, and as far as I could make out, wore no clothes." End quote. About 2 hours later, Tombazi and his companions descended the mountain and saw the creature's prints. They described the prints as, I quote, "similar in shape to those of a man, but only 6 to 7 inches in length by 4 inches wide. The prints were undoubtedly those of a biped." End quote. In June 1944, C.R. Cooke and his wife Margaret and a group of porters encountered a very large bipedal prints in soft mud at 14,000 feet, just below the Singali Ridge, which the porters said were of the jungle Admi, the wild man. The creature had come up through the bushes on the steep hillside from Nepal and crossed the track before continuing up the ridge. Cooke wrote, and I quote, "We laid Margaret's sunglasses beside each print to indicate its size and took photographs. These prints were strange and larger than any normal footprint. 14 inches heel to toe, with the great toe set back to one side, a first toe also large, and 3 little toes closely bunched together." End quote. Most famously, one of the most cited and debated pieces of evidence came when, while attempting to scale Mount Everest in 1951, Eric Shipton took photographs of a number of large prints his party had discovered in the snow at about 6,000 meters above sea level. Shipton took 3 photographs, one depicting the tracks and the other 2 of one particular print, which was size compared by a snow axe and boot for reference in the picture. The footprints had distinct 2 large toes and 3 smaller digits close together. These photographs have been subject to intense scrutiny and debate. Some argue that they are the best evidence of Yeti's existence, while others contend that the prints are those of a mundane creature that have been distorted by melting snow. Jeffrey Meldrum, a professor of anthropology and anatomy, examined a reconstructed form of the print in 2008. He stated the alignment of the toes matched the great ape, and that if the Yeti was a real creature, it would most likely spend most of its time in the subtropic region of the Himalayas, as opposed to high elevation. Meldrum stated it was hard to conclusively say that the prints were genuine, since Shipton only took 2 photos of a single track. After Shipton's photographs circulated throughout the Western world and throughout media outlets across the globe, a frenzy had formed. In 1959, the U.S. Embassy in Kathmandu went as far as issuing a memo to the State Department in Washington, D.C. concerning the group of Yeti hunters flocking to the Himalayas. The regulations governing mountain climbing expeditions in Nepal relating to the Yeti formed and consisted of 3 rules for anyone wishing to mount a trip. The first was stated that 5,000 rupees must be paid to the Nepalese government for a permit to search for the creature. The second regulation read, and I quote, "In case Yeti is traced, it can be photographed or caught alive, but it must not be killed or shot at except in emergency arising out of self-defense." End quote. It went on to say that any photographs had to be surrendered to the authorities, and the third regulation ensured that any news and reports throwing light on actual existence of the creature must be similarly handed over. Even world-renowned Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to ever conquer and summit Everest, along with his partner, Tenzing Norgay, spoke of their mysterious encounter and discovery of tracks on their own expedition.
Yes, well, that's one of our objectives. That's in the earlier part of the expedition. It's not one of the major objectives, but we regard it as an important one, and we're going to examine it fairly thoroughly. We'd like to try and find out exactly what's making those tracks, which undoubtedly have been found in the Himalayas.
What are you going to do if you find a snowman?
Well, we're taking with us what's called a capture gun, which is a gun which shoots a hypodermic syringe with a knockdown drug in it. And if we find a Yeti, well, we hope to put it to sleep with one of these capture guns and examine it a little more thoroughly.
Will you try to bring it home with you?
Well, I think if I followed my own inclinations, I'd be much happier to just examine it and let it go back to its own natural habitat.
Again, so much so that in 1960 to 61, Hillary returned to Everest and led the Silver Hut expedition, in which he and a party would purposely hunt for any evidence of a supposed Yeti. The Yeti hunt was to find evidence either proving or disproving the evidence of Yeti. It was supported by Marlin Perkins, the director of the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, who had hoped to discover a living Yeti. Hillary, skeptical but interested, chose the Rowling Valley to start the search. It was reputed to be a Yeti stronghold and where the supposed 1951 Shipton photographs of Yeti footprints had been taken. Although the party would go through great lengths of setting traps, cameras, tripwires, scouts, and other tools, they never found hard evidence of such a creature. The most they had found was fragments of hair, a suspicious track here and there, and after visiting a Tibetan monastery, the party came across a supposed Yeti scalp the monastery had kept. The scalp was taken back to London, where a small sample was cut off for testing.
Got it from the monastery itself, and so we've left these things around it. This is a sort of a ceremonial scarf that they put around things. And this rather tattered old object you see here is their scalp. Yeah. It's a very obviously quite old. It's certainly very brittle. It has to be treated with a good deal of care. But what exactly is?
How old is it?
Well, the local people claim it's 240 years old.
Which people is that?
The people who possess it, the Sherpas.
Explain it.
Investigation of it to try and identify whether or not it is really a complete scalp with a single unit, or whether it's been fabricated out of some other skins many years ago. In fact, an answer for it, really, if we can.
Has any analysis been made yet?
No, nothing at all. The work has been done actually on the hairs of this thing.
Marka Burns made a detailed examination of the sample of skin and hair from the alleged Yeti scalp and compared it with similar samples from other animals of the region, including serow, blue bear, and the black bear. Burns had concluded that the sample, and I quote, was probably made from the skin of an animal closely resembling sampled specimen of serow, a ram-like creature who was found throughout the Himalayas, but definitely not identical with it, possibly a local variety or race of the same species, different but closely related species, end quote.
Okay, now what about the Abominable Snowman?
Well, I think my reaction is now definitely that this whole story is mythological. We went into this very carefully on my last expedition, examined all the evidence, and we got a perfectly reasonable explanation, we feel, to all the evidence that appeared, like such as tracks, Yeti scalps, skins, and the stories of the lamas in the monasteries. We didn't have any difficulty in getting a perfectly rational explanation for all these phenomena.
This was the trip that was financed by the World Book Encyclopedia, isn't it?
Yes, my last expedition was essentially one scientific one, carrying out high-altitude physiological research. But one of our programs was to examine this business of the Abominable Snowman, and World Book Encyclopedia financed the whole project.
With story after story, sighting after sighting, this would persist into the 21st century. And just like our North American counterpart, Bigfoot and Sasquatch, even though so many have claimed to have seen something, no real physical or conclusive evidence has ever been found to this day. With only speculation and hearsay, the tale of Yeti remains one of folklore and one of the many mysteries of the Himalayas. A story that captures the imagination of all that come across it. In a world where the unexplained does exist, many people believe that a mysterious creature such as the Yeti can also exist coincide. And that about wraps up the video. Guys, I just want to say a really brief thank you. I appreciate it so much if you made it all the way to the end at this point. If you liked the content, please consider a like or a subscription. It helps the channel a lot. Please follow Dark Taboo on YouTube and all major podcast platforms. Thank you guys so much. Take care.